Hello. In this video, we will learn how to record and run macros in Excel.
Now we will record our first macro. So the task here is to insert a heading called monthly sales report into a report and then to format it. So the idea is we are creating a macro that creates a heading which we can reuse every time we have to create the report again. So we will start recording the macro by pressing this button, or we can use the button in the status bar below. So we will start with this. And also when you start recording a macro, by default, it's recorded as what's called a absolute macro. So that means the macro, like absolute cell references, will work on a fixed area or range in your workbook. And if you want to use relative cell references, it will basically work in different locations. So absolute macros is the default way. So you don't need to click here. So it will get recorded as absolute macro if you start recording straight away. And it will only apply for a fixed range. But if you want to go for relative cell references, we will look at example later. You have to click this button. So here we are going to start with the absolute macro. So we will just click on the record macro. And then the record macro window opens. Here we had to give a name to the macro. By default, macro 1, 2 like that will be given. So it's always best to give a descriptive name. So we will say format underscore report underscore heading. Here in the macro names, you can't use spaces. So that's why I'm using underscores. And then we have option where we can give a shortcut key. So that means if I press this given shortcut key, the macro will run. So I will use Control, and here inside the box, I will press Shift and then R. So my shortcut key is Control, Shift and R. So when you're using shortcut keys, if you use a shortcut key like Control C or which is already used in Excel, it will override that shortcut key. So it's always best to give a different shortcut key combination. So it will be something unique for the macro. Then it's asking me where to store the macro in. So we have three options. One is personal macro workbook, then new workbook, or this workbook. So if I go for personal macro workbook and save it there, then this macro will be available every time I'm in the Excel application. So if I want to store a macro that I need to use with different files, I can store it in the personal macro workbook. If I want, I can save it in a new workbook or this workbook. In that case, the difference is if I want to run the macro, that workbook needs to be open. Otherwise, I can't run the macro. So in this case, I will go for this workbook. And if you want, you can give a description. So that will describe what the macro is doing. So I will leave it over here. I will type insert and format report heading. So that's optional. You can leave it blank even. So then I will click OK. So I'm saving my files onto my OneDrive. So that's why I get a message like this. Can't auto save. I have set it for auto save. If you get that, you can go to save as. And you can give a location if you want. And then it will, since I have already given a name to that file, it appears here. And when I'm saving, it has to be saved as a macro enabled workbook with extension .xlsm. If I try to save it as a Excel workbook, I won't be able to save the macro in it. So if there's a macro, I need to always save it as a Excel macro enable file like this. So I click that and click save. Now if I come here and see, this icon has now changed to stop recording. So that means it's basically recording all the steps that I'm doing in the Excel workbook. So first thing I will do is I will come to A1 and now I will type the heading. Monthly sales report. Then come to the home tab and I will change the font size to Arial 16. And I will make it bold. And I will select the range up to M column. And I will apply a dark blue background and make the font color white. So this is how I want. So this is basically the macro that I want to create. So just to create the heading and then format that. So once you have finished with your macro recording, you can stop at a cell where you want to have your cursor when the macro runs and ends. So here I want to run the macro and end in cell A3. So I will stop over there. And I will now come to the developer tab and click on stop recording. So now the macro has basically got recorded and saved. So if I want to look at the macro, I can come into this button over here, macros, and you see the macro name, format report heading. And if I want to look at the code, I can go and click on edit. And I see the code that was generated automatically and it's stored now. So let me just come out of this. I will close that. And again, if I click on macros and select the macro, from here, there's a run button. From here, I can run it as well, but I want to run it with the shortcut key. I can use that. So for now, I will just close this and I will go to the next sheet where I want to run the macro. And let's say this is my next month report heading that I want to insert. So to run the macro, I can either come here to macros and click run here, or I can use the shortcut key combination Control Shift and R. So I will use the shortcut keys Control Shift and then R. And my heading got inserted and the macro has basically now done its job, and the cursor has ended in the A3 cell. So let's go and look at the code again. If I come here and click edit, I can see the code in the editor. So here it starts with sub format report. That's the heading I gave. Format report heading. That's the name I gave for the macro. So here it's got the name again. And the description I gave, insert and format report heading, is over here. And it shows the shortcut key combination I gave. And then it has the code. So here it says range A1 select. So that's where I selected A1 cell. And here it says monthly sales report. That's where I typed in the sales report heading. And this is where I changed the font. I basically kept the same font area and changed the font size to 16. And finally, I stopped at A3. So although you don't know VBA still, you can read the code and understand some of it. So that's what has been recorded in the macro. So let me just close that. So you'll see I have recorded this macro as a absolute macro. So whenever I run it, it will only work on this cell range, that is from A1 to M1. Now we will look at how to record a relative macro. So earlier we created an absolute macro which works on a fixed range of cells like this. Now I want to create two headings. The task is to insert two headings, name and sales, and then to format it. And I want to apply it anywhere I click in the workbook. So here if I want to insert it, I can just click here, run the macro, and it will give this headings in those two cells and it will do the formatting. So that's the basic idea we want to do. So I will start recording a relative macro. So I will come here. Before I start recording, before I click record macro, I will click on use relative macro references and then I will click record macro. So I'll give the name relative macro. Then I will use the shortcut key Ctrl+Shift+M and I will save in this workbook. Description I will leave it blank and click OK. So now it's recording. So I'll remain inside this cell and I will type sales. I will type name here and then sales. Then I will select both cells, make it bold, make it font size 12, and I will apply a dark blue background and a white font color. That's all I need to do. I will come below into this cell and go to developer and stop recording. I will also deactivate use relative cell references. Let's say I want to have the headings over here. I will click on that cell. Then I will click the shortcut key Ctrl+Shift+M and I got it that inserted over here. So if I want it over here, I can still again come here. The macro is there. I can run it and it appears over there. So wherever I keep my cursor, the relative macro will input the name and the sales and do the formatting. So this relative macro is different from the absolute macro we did earlier. So it works on the relative location that we keep the cursor in, whereas the absolute macro works on the fixed area like this, where we had the heading for the report earlier. So it only always works on the same range, but here the relative macro works on the cell where we are keeping our cursor on. Now we will record a more extensive macro. So here we got some sales data. We got the name of the employee, email, date of birth, and then the sales figures. And these are the tasks we need to do. We want to split the name into first name and last name, remove the hyperlinks from the emails, and the date format, I want to change it to DDMMYYY from the long format. And the commission, I want to calculate a sales commission as if the sales are greater than or equal to 10,000, I want to apply a 10% sales commission column over here. And I want to format the headings and add borders to the report. So those are the steps. So I'll come here, go to developer, click on record macro, and I will give the name sales report. And I will use the shortcut key Ctrl+Shift+T. And I will save in this workbook. And description, I will leave it blank. Click OK. Now it's recording. So I need to first split the name into two columns. So here I will select this column and insert a column. And I will name this first name. And I will copy it here and make it last name. Then I will select the names with Ctrl+Shift+Down arrow. And I will go to Data. In the ribbon, Text columns. And keep it on delimiter because it's separated by a delimiter space. Click Next. And space is the delimiter correct, so preview is also fine. And click Next. And finish. So I got the name separated out into first name and last name. Then I will come and select the emails with Ctrl+Shift+Down arrow. I will click on the right mouse. Remove hyperlinks. That's done. So then I will select the dates with the mouse like this. So I'm not using Ctrl+Shift+Down arrow. So there's a difference when we use Ctrl+Shift+Down arrow and when we select using the mouse like this. So we'll see the difference when we run the macro. And then I will explain why we are using Ctrl+Shift+Down arrow instead of using highlighting like this with the mouse. So now I have selected this. I will press Ctrl and 1 to get the formatting box. And I want the date format DDMMYYY. So I will select this date format. And it will change from this long format to the short format. Click OK. So date formatting is done. Now I need to have another column to calculate commission. So I will type the heading commission. And come down. So I will use a if function to calculate the commission. If. And the logical test is whether sales F3 is greater than or equal to 10,000. And the value if true is the commission will then be F3 into 0.1 or 10%. And the value false will be 0 or no commission. I will close the bracket, Control Enter. And I will copy it down. We'll come here and change the formatting like this. Now I need to format the headings. So I will select the first cell, Ctrl+Shift+Right arrow. I will apply a dark blue background and white font color and make it bold. And then I will select this first column, Ctrl+Shift+Down arrow, and then all of the columns. Then I will apply all borders. And this is all I need to do. All the steps are done. So I will keep the cursor one cell below the data. I will keep the cursor here and go to developer and click stop recording. So my macro, if I come and check the macro, so sales report macro is now there. And on the other sheet, I again have some raw data without any formatting. So let's see if the macro works. So I can either run from here, select sales report or run, or I can use the shortcut key. So I'll use the shortcut key, Ctrl+Shift and T. And it works. See, the formatting has got applied. Everything has done. Everything's fine. commission has been calculated. So my macro works basically. So this macro basically works on this data. Now if I go to the next sheet, you see I have the raw data again, but I have 3 additional rows of data. So let me run the same macro on this sheet and see. So I run the macro Control-Shift-T, and formatting, everything got applied. But if you see, the date of birth has not been formatted for the last 3 records. And the commission has not been calculated for the last 3 records. That is because when I was doing the formatting for date of birth, I selected the range like this. Like for the dates, like for the first name and the last name and the email, I didn't use Control-Shift down arrow to select. So that's why this additional data has not been captured into the macro. So this additional data is not basically being processed in the macro. So there's few ways to correct this. One thing is to, when you start recording the macro, when you're selecting ranges like this, you can use Control-Shift down arrow. Or if you're selecting columns, you can press Control-Shift right arrow like this and select. Then the range becomes dynamic. But if you use the mouse like this and select, the range is not dynamic and the macro will record it that way. And this additional data will not be basically processed inside the macro. So these ranges will be ignored. So first way is to use Control-Shift and the arrow key when you're recording the macro. And if you have forgotten to do that, you can do 2 things. One thing is, you see date of birth is in column E. And if you go to the macro like this, go select sales report and click edit, you can see the code here. So I want to check in the E column. So if you see in the code, you'll see E3 to E9 dot select. And then I have added the date format like this. So this range is not dynamic. So it has to be changed to the new range. So I want to change this until from E3 to E9 has to be changed to E3 to E12. Like here, when I was selecting ranges using the Control-Shift arrow key method, like for, see, in this range B2, I first selected B2 and I selected that, and then I did this range using the Control-Shift down arrow. Here also I have selected B3, selected that, and used the Control-Shift down arrow. So that's why it says down. So here I got E3 to E9 and I need to make it E12 and then change the date format. So what I'll do is I will click here and change this to 12. And then I will come back. And on this other sheet, we got some fresh data. So let's try running that Control-Shift-T and see the date format got applied properly. So that's because I changed the range cell numbers to accommodate up to E12. So I early stopped at E9, I changed it to E12. And there's another way I can do that. Here, for example, we had B3, only the starting cell, dot select, and then I had the Control-Shift down code over here. So what I can do is I can change, I already changed this to E12, but let me just change it to E3 only. So it's the starting cell only. And after dot select, I will press enter. And I will copy this code for it to copy down. Or basically for it to I will copy this code to use the Control Shift down arrow method. That is range selection Excel down this code. So I will copy that and paste it over here. So that also works. Instead of changing this from E3 to E12, I can just keep the first cell E3 and then use this code to use the Control Shift down arrow. So that's another thing you can do when you're changing the code. So let me go back. So I will go to this sheet where the fresh data is, and I will try again with the new code, Control Shift T, and it got applied. So that's the third method you can use to correct the range if you have not done it properly when you're recording. If you haven't used Control Shift down arrow or right arrow to make the ranges dynamic, you change the code using the two methods I told you. So let's look at the final commission calculation. Now here you can see this is where I use the if condition, and then for the autofill I have this range G3 to G9. So this G9, because I'm stopping at G9, I have not calculated the commission for these three cells. So what I can do is I can again change the range so that G9 becomes G12. So here I got some fresh data again. So first let me come and change the code. So I will change this G9 to G12. So then the commission should get calculated until the G12 cell. So I'll come back into the fresh data and I will use the shortcut key Control Shift T. And see, commission got calculated here. So far we have used two methods to run macros. That is, we have used the macros run button over here, and we have used shortcuts or shortcut keys. There's a third method you can use, that is by assigning buttons. So when you click those buttons, the macro will run. So you can basically assign a macro to a button on your workbook. So when you press that button, the macro will run and then execute. So let's see how we can do that. First, we will record a simple macro. We will have two tasks here. First one is to format the sales data, and the second one is to the chart. So first we will do the first task and create a macro for that. And we will have one button to do the formatting, and we will then record a second macro to add a chart, and that chart macro will be assigned to another add chart button. Now I will start recording the first macro to format the sales data. I'll go to developer, record macro, and I will give it a name, format sales data. And I will leave the shortcut key and the description out and click OK. So now I will come to home, select the headings, use a dark blue for background, white font, and make it Arial 12 and bold. I will select the data and apply borders and change the font 12 again. And let's say that's all the formatting I need to do. So I'll come to developer and stop recording. So format sales data, task is done, macro recorded. So I'll go to add chart macro recording. So again, I will go to developer, click macro recorder, and I will give the name chart, and I leave shortcut key out and description out. Click OK. Now I select the data, go to insert. Here I will go to recommended chart. Just select the first column chart. Okay. I won't do any changes here, but I will just do a small change to the heading. Change it to bold and apply dark blue. And let's say I did some other changes. So this is all I need to do with the chart. So I will place it like this and come to developer and stop record. So if I come to macros, I see the chart macro and the format sales data macro. So now I will go to the other sheet, which has the raw data. Here I'm going to insert two buttons to run the two macros. So come here. I again go to developer, click on insert over here, down click, and under form controls, I select the first one, the button. And then I do a left click on my mouse and I can draw a button like this. Then this assign macro window comes. From assign macro, I need to select the macro I need to assign to this button. So I will select form as sales data and click OK. So now the button number is by default given. So I'll change the button now name. I will change it to format sales data. I can basically keep it like that. Then I will insert another button. Again, button. And I will draw a button like this. And I will select chart macro to be assigned to that and click OK. So again, I will change the name here to chart. So I got the format sales data button, chart button. So these are now assigned to macros. So I want to first do the formatting. I will click the format sales data button and formatting gets applied. Then I want to do the chart. I click the chart button and the chart gets created. So that's how you can assign macros to buttons like this and then run the macro from that. So far we have looked at saving a macro into the current workbook or another workbook. But there's a third option where you can save your macro into what's called the personal macro workbook. The personal macro workbook is always available when you're in the Excel application. So if you want to save a macro that you want to be available every time you're working in Excel, you can store your macro into the personal macro workbook. It's like a common folder where you can save your macro and it's available when you're working with any workbook in Excel. So sometimes we want to do some initial formatting when we start on a new workbook. So maybe we want to change the font size and maybe we want to remove the grid lines, something like that. So let's record a macro where we do some initial formatting to the workbook and save it in the personal macro workbook. So I will go to developer tab. I'm in a new workbook, book 1 now. So I will go to developer tab and start record macro. And I will give it the name format workbook, format underscore workbook. And for the shortcut key, I will use Control Shift and F. And I will save it in the personal macro workbook. And click OK. So it's recording. So I will select the first sheet like this and go to home, and I will change the font to Arial, maybe 12. And then I will select the whole worksheet and come to view, and I will remove the grid lines like this. So let's say that's the initial formatting I may want to do on the new workbook. So I will now save the macro. I will click stop recording. And now the macro is available in the personal macro workbook. So if I go to macros now, I can see format workbook. That macro is there in the personal macro workbook. So if I go to edit, I can't view the workbook because it says cannot edit a macro on a hidden workbook. So, and then to unhide the workbook using the unhide command. That is because the personal macro workbook is hidden by default. So if you want to work on it, you have to first unhide it. So I will say OK here, cancel here. Then I will go to view and click on unhide over here. And it says unhide workbook personal. I say OK. And see, now this is the personal macro workbook where I have saved the macro. So if I go to developer and go to macros, so what I have is the format workbook macro, and I select edit. And I see the macro is now available. Now I can see the macro code in the editor. So let's just close this. So let's go back to my workbook. And I will open a new workbook with Control and N. So now I'm in book 2, which is a new workbook. So let's see whether the macro works. I'll use the shortcut key Control, Shift and F. So, and it's working on other workbooks as well. So that's how you can save a macro into your personal macro workbook and use it in any workbook that you want to use it for.
Thanks for watching.